No technicians allowed in the briefing room. The sharp voice cut through the air as the brown-haired woman accidentally stepped into the flight operations center. A young officer scowled at her. "You check aircraft wheels. You don't need to know our flight plans." She quietly backed away without arguing. But then an old, decorated pilot stood up, staring at her intently. His eyes went wide with recognition. "Wait, is that you? Are you Ghost Falcon?" The entire room fell completely silent. Meet Anya Riddle, 33 years old, aircraft maintenance technician at Black Ridge Airbase. European heritage running through her veins. Dark brown hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. Small frame that disappears inside oversized mechanic coveralls and steel-toed boots. She maintains the machines that keep pilots alive. Checks hydraulics, replaces cockpit batteries, loads oxygen, updates sensors before and after every mission. But she's not part of the flight squadron, has no authority to speak about flight plans or combat strategies, just a wrench turner. Don't act like you understand air combat principles. Don't touch cockpit controls unless specifically requested. The dismissal comes daily from young hotshot pilots who see her as furniture, from officers who think technical knowledge has nothing to do with tactical awareness. But Anya notices everything. She sees when Lieutenant Parker's throttle response lags by 0.3 seconds during pre-flight checks. She observes how Captain Morrison consistently overcorrects his rudder input during taxi operations. She watches Major Stevens compensate for a subtle gyroscope drift that he thinks nobody else detects. She could fix all of them, could turn good pilots into great ones. Instead, she makes quiet adjustments to their aircraft after they leave, recalibrates systems to compensate for their individual quirks, lets them think their flying is improving naturally. One afternoon, while the primary pilot was delayed, Anya automatically adjusted the control stick alignment on an F-16 scheduled for immediate takeoff. "Who told you to do that?" demanded Sergeant Crawford, catching her in the act. "Because the 2-degree left deviation would cause the aircraft to drift off radar response patterns," she replied simply. Crawford stared at her like she'd spoken ancient Greek. "How would you know anything about radar patterns?" She didn't answer, just continued her pre-flight inspection with the methodical precision that made her colleagues assume she was German, or maybe Austrian. Nobody had bothered to ask, but Crawford checked her work anyway. The stick alignment was perfect, exactly where it needed to be for optimal radar signature management. He never mentioned who had told him to make that adjustment. 3 hours later, the mission returned successfully. The pilot praised the smooth handling characteristics of his aircraft during the low-altitude run. Nobody remembered the small woman who had made it possible. Anya has learned to be invisible. It's safer that way. She watches young pilots make mistakes that could kill them, sees them ignore environmental factors that could turn routine missions into disasters, observes them rely too heavily on computer systems that can fail at the worst possible moments. And every day, she quietly fixes what she can, adjusts what needs adjusting, prevents disasters that will never be reported because they never happen. "What does a ground technician know about flying?" she hears them ask. Everything, she thinks, but never says. Because some knowledge is too dangerous to share. Some skills are too frightening to reveal. Some truths are too painful to remember. In her tool bag, Anya always carries one item that has nothing to do with maintenance. An old pilot's glove, worn thin at the fingertips from years of use. Embroidered on the cuff in fading thread, GFLZ 73. Blackridge was preparing for Operation Nightfire, a night intercept simulation requiring 6 pilots and comprehensive ground support. The briefing room buzzed with tactical discussions, flight patterns, radar signatures, enemy simulation protocols. Anya read something while reviewing the pre-flight checklist. The radar response mapping hadn't been updated for the new electronic warfare suite, a critical oversight that could compromise the entire exercise. She headed to the operations center to report the discrepancy. "This is a briefing area, not a supply closet. Get out." The sharp rebuke came from Captain Morrison, a desk officer who'd never flown a combat mission, but wielded procedure manuals like weapons. Anya turned to leave without argument. She'd learned that technical expertise carried no weight against military hierarchy. But then an old, decorated pilot stood up, staring at her intently. His eyes went wide with recognition. "Wait, is that you? Are you Ghost Falcon?" The entire room felt completely silent. Hayes approached slowly, studying her face with the intensity of someone trying to solve a 12-year-old puzzle. "Do you still remember the authentication code from September 11th, 2013? Without hesitation, Anya reached into her pocket and produced a folded, yellowed piece of paper. Alpha Echo 19 Vector Blind Drop Silent Reset Beacon. Captain Morrison looked confused. "What's Ghost Squadron? I've never heard of any unit by that designation." Hayes never took his eyes off Anya. "That's because Ghost Squadron never officially existed. Black operations. Classified missions that couldn't be acknowledged." He paused, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Pilots who flew when regular squadrons couldn't, who handled situations too dangerous or too politically sensitive for standard military response." "Sir, with respect, she's a maintenance technician. She's never been flight qualified," Morrison protested. Hayes laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Flight qualified, son. This woman has more flight hours in hostile territory than most of our active pilots have in training exercises." The room was listening now. Every conversation had stopped. "Tell them about Belgrade," Hayes said quietly. "Tell them about the radar facility you took out with a single pass, no backup, through a surface-to-air missile grid that was supposed to be impenetrable." Anya's jaw tightened. "That mission is classified." "The mission, yes, but the codename isn't. They called you Ghost Falcon because you could slip through radar patterns like you weren't even there." Young Lieutenant Parker, who'd been dismissive of Anya's technical suggestions just that morning, stared in disbelief. "You're saying she was a pilot? An actual combat pilot?" 17 confirmed missions, Hayes continued. All successful, all in conditions that regular squadrons wouldn't attempt. She specialized in electronic warfare, evasion, and precision strikes in heavily defended airspace. "Then why is she working maintenance?" Morrison asked, still skeptical. Hayes looked at Anya, waiting for her to answer. She was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of old grief. "Because on Mission 18, I made a mistake, and 5 good pilots died because of it." The silence that followed was deafening. Hayes nodded slowly. September 13th, 2013. The mission that officially never happened. 6 aircraft went out. Only 1 came back. "But it wasn't your fault," he added quickly. "The intelligence was wrong. The enemy knew you were coming. It was a trap." "I was squadron leader," Anya said simply. "Their lives were my responsibility." She looked around the room at the young faces staring at her. After that, I decided that if I couldn't keep pilots alive in the air, maybe I could keep them alive on the ground by making sure their aircraft never failed them the way I failed my squadron. Colonel Hayes reached into his briefcase and pulled out a photograph. 6 pilots, in flight suits, standing beside their aircraft. The image was old, slightly faded. Ghost Squadron final roster. He pointed to the smallest figure in the group, Ghost Falcon, the only pilot I've ever known who could read radar patterns like others read books.
Lieutenant Parker stepped closer to examine the photo. Ma'am, the radar response issue you mentioned earlier, how did you know about that? Because I've seen what happens when electronic warfare systems aren't properly synchronized. I've watched good pilots die because their aircraft couldn't handle enemy jamming. She looked directly at Morrison. You can check my credentials if you want, but right now you have 6 pilots about to fly a night exercise with compromised radar systems. You can either fix it or you can explain to their families why procedure was more important than their lives. Around Anya's neck, barely visible beneath her coveralls, hangs a small antenna fragment, salvaged from a downed F-16. The numbers etched into the metal are nearly worn away. Falcon 17B. Ghost Falcon wasn't just a call sign. It was a legend. For 3 years between 2010 and 2013, enemy forces in Eastern Europe reported encounters with an aircraft that shouldn't have existed. A fighter that appeared on radar one moment and vanished the next. That could strike heavily defended targets and disappear before retaliation was possible. Intelligence agencies called it electronic warfare perfected. Military analysts dubbed it the ultimate stealth fighter. But it wasn't advanced technology. It was Anya Riddle. She had developed an almost supernatural ability to read electromagnetic signatures, to predict radar sweep patterns, to find the blind spots in even the most sophisticated detection systems. While other pilots relied on jamming equipment and chaff dispensers, Anya flew through radar nets like a ghost, using pure skill and environmental awareness. 17 missions, Colonel Hayes continued, his voice carrying the weight of classified history. Each one impossible by conventional standards. He opened a thick folder marked with security classifications. Belgrade, October 2011. Enemy radar installation considered impregnable. 12 surface-to-air missile sites, overlapping coverage with no apparent gaps. Command said it couldn't be done without massive casualties. Hayes showed them satellite photos, before and after images of a facility that had been reduced to smoking rubble. Ghost Falcon went in alone. Single pass, no escort, no backup. Neutralize the installation and every SAM site within a 15-kilometer radius. How? Lieutenant Parker asked, genuinely amazed. By understanding that radar isn't just about technology. It's about people. Human operators follow patterns. They get tired. They make assumptions. Anya could read those patterns like music. The Prague incident, January 2012. Enemy fighters had shot down 2 NATO reconnaissance aircraft in international airspace. Politically sensitive situation.
couldn't risk an international incident. More photos, wreckage scattered across a mountainside. Ghost Falcon intercepted and eliminated 4 enemy aircraft without ever appearing on anyone's radar. The enemy never knew what hit them. Officially, their aircraft suffered mechanical failures. Captain Morrison was beginning to understand. She was what? A Black Ops assassin? She was a problem solver, Hayes corrected. When diplomatic solutions failed and conventional military action was too risky, they sent Ghost Falcon. He turned to Anya. Tell them about Moscow. Anya's face went pale. Sir, that's still... Moscow is why you're still alive, Sergeant, and why you're standing here instead of in a military cemetery. Hayes addressed the room. March 2013. Intelligence indicated that enemy forces had acquired NATO aircraft identification codes. They were planning false flag operations using our own IFF signatures. Ghost Falcon was tasked with infiltrating enemy airspace and retrieving the stolen codes. Deep penetration mission behind enemy lines. No support, no extraction plan if things went wrong. She succeeded, retrieved the codes, and neutralized the threat. But the enemy had prepared a trap for the extraction. The room was completely silent now. Even Morrison had stopped shuffling papers. 6 aircraft went in for the pickup. Ghost Squadron's final mission. They thought they were rescuing 1 pilot. Hayes looked directly at Anya. What they found was a squadron of enemy fighters waiting in ambush. The intelligence about Ghost Falcon's location had been deliberately leaked. But you got out, Parker said. You survived. I was in the air when the trap was sprung, Anya said quietly. I saw my squadron flying into the kill zone. I had 2 choices. Radio a warning and reveal my position, or watch them die. What did you do? I tried to save them, broke radio silence, warned them about the ambush, but it was too late. The enemy was already in position. Her voice became steadier, but her eyes carried the weight of 12 years. 5 aircraft went down, 10 pilots, the best friends I'd ever had. And you? I was flying escort, high altitude when I saw what was happening. I dove into the engagement, took out 3 enemy fighters before they can finish off my squad mates. But you couldn't save them, not all of them. 2 pilots ejected safely, were captured, spent 18 months as POWs before being released in a prisoner exchange. Hayes nodded. And officially, none of it ever happened. Ghost Squadron was disbanded, all records classified beyond top secret. The surviving pilots were reassigned to different commands and ordered never to speak about their service. What about her? Morrison gestured toward Anya. Ghost Falcon was declared Kia, killed in a training accident. Her military record was sealed. Her identity was erased. So who is she now? Anya Riddle, civilian aircraft technician, a woman who chose to start over rather than live with the weight of being a legend. Hayes closed the folder. But legends have a way of revealing themselves, especially when they see young pilots making mistakes that could get them killed. He looked around the room.
Every technical adjustment she's made to your aircraft, every systems modification she suggested, every time she's warned you about equipment malfunctions, she's been using skills learned in the most dangerous airspace in the world. You've been flying aircraft maintained by the most successful combat pilot of the last 20 years, and you've been treating her like she's invisible. Lieutenant Parker stepped forward. "Ma'am, I owe you an apology. We all do." Anya shook her head. "You don't owe me anything. I chose this job because I wanted to keep pilots safe. That's what matters." "But why maintenance? Why not return to active duty?" "Because every time I see a young pilot climbing into a cockpit, I see my squadron, and I remember that the difference between coming home and not coming home often has nothing to do with skill or courage." She gestured toward the hangar bay. "It has to do with whether someone on the ground cared enough to check every system twice, to notice the small problems before they become big ones, to make sure that when you need your aircraft to perform, it won't let you down. I may not be Ghost Falcon anymore,
But I can still keep pilots alive, just from a different position type. I owe a debt. If you've ever been saved by someone you didn't have time to thank." Word spread quickly through Black Ridge Airbase. Not the classified details. Those would remain buried forever. But the essential truth. The quiet woman in maintenance coveralls was someone who understood flight in ways most pilots never would. The mockery stopped overnight. The dismissive comments ended. Instead, something else began. Young pilots started lingering in the maintenance bay. After their shifts, they'd approach Anya with questions that had nothing to do with routine aircraft servicing. "Ma'am, how do you read radar when your electronic countermeasures fail? What do you do when you're flying through a sand field and your warning systems go offline? How do you stay calm when everything is going wrong at once?" Anya never claimed to be teaching them, never positioned herself as an instructor. Instead, she would work on their aircraft while sharing casual observations about electromagnetic signatures, about atmospheric conditions that affected radar performance, about the mental discipline required to fly in hostile environments. "The most important instrument in any cockpit," she told the young lieutenant, while calibrating his navigation system, "isn't on the panel. It's between your ears." Lieutenant Parker became her first unofficial student. He volunteered to help with evening maintenance shifts, ostensibly to learn more about aircraft systems. "Ma'am, that radar evasion technique you mentioned, could you show me on the simulator?" Anya looked up from the engine diagnostics she was running. "What I did was survive. What you need to learn is how to live." There's a difference, but she showed him anyway. How to read the subtle patterns in radar sweeps. How to use terrain masking and atmospheric conditions to reduce detectability. How to think 3 moves ahead when electronic warfare systems were unreliable. Soon, other pilots joined the informal evening sessions, not as students receiving instruction, but as professionals, sharing knowledge about the craft they all served. The maintenance bay became an unexpected classroom where textbook theory met real-world experience, where young pilots learned skills that weren't taught in flight school. Colonel Hayes watched the transformation with quiet satisfaction. Black Ridge's flight safety record improved dramatically, not because of new equipment or updated protocols, but because pilots were learning to think beyond their instruments. 6 months later, a small plaque appeared near Anya's workstation. Not official military recognition. Her service record was still classified. Just a simple acknowledgement from the people who worked beside her. Vector blind, drop silent reset beacon. Below it, someone had added in smaller text, "She never flew for glory. She flew so the rest of us could land." The evening training sessions continued, Anya sharing knowledge that couldn't be found in any manual, young pilots learning that survival often depended more on intuition than technology. "The sky doesn't care about your rank," she told them during one session. "It doesn't care about your confidence or your equipment. It only respects preparation and humility." A young female pilot raised her hand. "Ma'am, do you ever miss it? Flying combat missions?" Anya was quiet for a moment, watching through the hangar doors as an F-16 taxied past in the evening light. "I miss my squadron. I miss knowing that we were good enough to handle missions that others couldn't. But I don't miss the weight of making life and death decisions for other people." She gestured toward the aircraft around them. "Here, I can still serve, still keep pilots safe. But now when you climb into that cockpit, the decisions are yours. My job is just to make sure your aircraft gives you every advantage possible." Ghost Falcon had been invisible to enemy radar. Anya Riddle had chosen to be invisible to the world. But her influence was spreading one pilot at a time, one lesson at a time, one safe landing at a time. Type, "I will live well if you believe there are people who land safely not for themselves, but for the whole squadron." 2 years later, Lieutenant Parker was selected for advanced combat training. When his instructors asked about his exceptional electronic warfare knowledge, he mentioned his aircraft maintenance training and a technician who taught me to listen to radar patterns. Nobody understood what he meant, but 6 other pilots in his class did. They'd all spent quiet evenings learning from a woman who serviced their aircraft and shared wisdom that couldn't be found in textbooks. Anya never sought recognition, never applied for reinstatement to active duty, never asked for anything beyond the privilege of keeping aircraft airworthy. But her influence spread like contrails across a clear sky. Pilots she taught went on to train others. Her techniques became whispered knowledge, passed from experienced aviators to nervous rookies. Her approach to reading electromagnetic environments found its way into unofficial training supplements. Most importantly, her example of quiet confidence, of serving without recognition, of choosing service over celebrity, inspired a generation of military personnel to look beyond rank and reputation, to see the value in people others had dismissed, to understand that sometimes the most important person on the base is the one everyone ignores. Anya Riddle never became famous, never wrote memoirs or gave interviews, never appeared on television to tell her war stories. She chose to remain what she'd always been, the person who made the machines work when lives depended on them. But in doing so, she became something more powerful than any decorated ace. She became proof that you don't need a cockpit to make a difference. You don't need a call sign to save lives. You don't need recognition to change the world. Sometimes, the most important battles are fought in silence, by people who choose service over stardom, who pick responsibility over recognition, who understand that true excellence isn't about being seen. It's about ensuring others can see clearly when it matters most. If you've ever been underestimated because of your job title, your appearance, or your background, if you've ever chosen to help someone succeed rather than showcasing your own achievements, if you've ever worked quietly in the background, making things better without expecting applause, this story is for you. Because heroes don't always wear flight suits or carry call signs. Sometimes they carry wrenches and diagnostic tools. Sometimes they teach through example rather than instruction. Sometimes They save lives by preparing others to save themselves. Ghost Falcon was a legend who became a memory. Anya Riddle was a memory who became a teacher. And every pilot who learned to fly a little safer, think a little clearer, and come home a little more reliable became living proof that the most powerful weapon in any arsenal isn't technology. It's knowledge, shared freely by someone who cares more about your mission success than their own recognition. The maintenance technician's greatest flight wasn't the one that destroyed enemy targets. It was the flight of confidence she gave to every young pilot who thought they weren't ready for what was waiting in the sky. That flight continues every day. If you believe in stories that touch the heart, like this one, leave a comment. And don't forget to subscribe to Ironheart Stories. We tell the stories that shouldn't be forgotten. Real people are creating and telling stories, not mass-produced AI.